Well, hello out there, and welcome to another edition of the Intrazone Roadmap Pitstop. This is the September 2019 edition. It's a bonus monthly episode that answers that burning question in your mind. What's rolling out now for SharePoint and related Microsoft 365 technologies? This month, I talk with Max Kulakov, who's a designer on the OneDrive and SharePoint engineering team, and we'll talk all things web parts. If you want to know something about web parts, Max has the answer. Know that this episode is essentially the message center for everyone. We want to make sure that everyone, not just cloud admins, know what it is that we're doing and inform you about what's here available to you to use today. We'll keep everyone informed, current, and of course, ahead of that ever-curving Microsoft 365 roadmap. If you're ready, are you ready? We're off to the races to learn all about SharePoint and Microsoft 365, September 2019. Here we go. Our first stop in our journey is all about employee engagement. This is that area of Microsoft 365 that helps you communicate broadly. When you've got a message that's meant for everyone, where you want to engage as many people as possible and have it be a two-way dialogue, that's employee engagement, and that is a big part of what we focus on to bring you new features and updates to help you do that in a more scaled way and, of course, a fluid way for people to engage with. The first thing that I want to talk about is the page diagnostics tool that we've had out for a while for SharePoint has been updated, and it's got a couple of cool new features. Just to be real clear, this is a Chromium browser extension that's designed to help you identify some SharePoint pages in Microsoft 365 that might not be delivering that optimal performance, and this is both for modern and classic pages. So what it does is it works by comparing characteristics on the site page that we have best practices or things that we know people do, and we want to guide them on how to do it better or to do it differently. And so this helps them with taking remediation steps to identify things like items or images that are too big, whether a CDN is properly configured or is not in place, or if you have an older web part that's actually relying on an iframe. Those are kind of things that you will get from the diagnostic tool to highlight not only what is the issue, but how to remediate and take suggested steps to fix it. So we'll definitely have a Learn More link here so you can go read about the page diagnostics tool and certainly the updates and how that's helping you get the best performance out of all your pages in SharePoint in Microsoft 365. Now, commonly on those pages are web parts, and this month we shipped a whole bunch of new web parts. And it's actually the topic that we'll then take a pause and talk to an expert in how they design those web parts. But let me first enumerate what those new web parts are and a little bit about them. The first one is a new button web part. And it's as simple as it sounds, but it's very dynamic in what you can do with it. You effectively put a button on the page that you want to have somebody click on that then does some action, loads a form, takes them to a web page, completes something. The next one is a call to action, which pairs nicely with the button. You might want to raise a little bit more awareness in an issue or a big announcement or something. And this just gives a little bit more chrome and some color options to be able to highlight that news or information, of course, and have that be linkable. The next one, I think, is one of the most beautiful web parts that we've put out in a while and very useful for companies that are distributed across the world. It's the World Clock web part. And this is something that is very mindful in what part of the world you're from, how you read the clock, but also something that you can configure to highlight the different parts of the globe that you want to call attention to, especially when you're having lots of meetings that span across the globe, to be mindful of what time is it with the person that I'm speaking with before I reach them and pull them into a conversation. What time is it there? The next one is actually a really simple one, but I use this one a lot just for visual sake. It's the divider web part. You want to put a divider on the page. We've had this, but the update actually brings the ability for you to create a number of different ways to divide content, to make it more visual, to make it take up less space or more space. There's a lot of neat things that you can do with the divider web part. We've updated also the weather widget, or the weather web part as it is, and the highlighted content web part. Both of these are a little bit more configurable, And one of the ones, the highlighted content web part, the highest requested feature for that particular web part is the ability to build a custom query. So now with the highlighted content web part, not only do you get all the things that you can check and different ways that you can program the web part, but you can actually build a custom query with really nice logic that pulls the exact information that you're looking for. So you can learn more about these and all the web parts in a link that we'll put into the show notes that really highlights all these wonderful ways that you can put not only the web parts, but different pieces of information to create dynamic landing pages, great dashboards, and all the things that you want to bring in and showcase to your audience. And now let's hear from Max Kulakov. He's a designer from the OneDrive and SharePoint engineering team, and he's here to explain a little bit more about the care and how they listen to customers and take that information and turn it around to design useful web parts that scale both to the business needs and mindful about the different devices that people are consuming all that information on. So let's turn our attention to listen to what Max has to say about SharePoint web parts. So it is that time in the podcast where we turn our attention to people who really know how some of these moving parts work in SharePoint, in OneDrive. And so we're fortunate today to talk to Max Kulakov, who is a designer on the SharePoint and OneDrive team. And today we'll talk all about the web parts that are just rolling out this month. We really want to get your sense of design all up. Before we jump into it, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do on the team, how you got here.
Hi, my name is Max. I'm lucky to be a part of the OneDrive SharePoint design family. And here at SharePoint, I design web parts and authoring experiences.
We were fortunate enough to kind of grab you away from your desk, which is a nice open space with all of the OneDrive and SharePoint designers.
Yeah, that's what I actually really like about being here within this team. So it's a lot of collaboration going on. You can always approach people and ask advice and share opinions. So it's really collaborative environment.
What we want to dive in today is to learn a little bit more about how Microsoft and your team approach building what is effectively a backbone part of SharePoint, web parts. There's web parts, there's lists, there's pages, there's news. But at the end of the day, pretty much everybody's going to drag a web part onto a page and do something miraculous with it, or maybe something very simple. For your role as a designer working on some of these web parts, what are the design principles that go into what you build and how you expect people to use web parts in SharePoint?
One of the challenges here designing a web part is to combine form and function, is actually to make sure that the web part is not only beautiful, not only like very visually spectacular, but it's also functional and it conveys its purpose to all the people really well.
One of the things I know that we've done very different from the past is most of SharePoint is mobile first. Obviously, it's data-driven. It's accessible to bring in lots of different type of content. But the design of it, when you think of a web part that's meant to be shown on a 4-inch phone, a 13-inch device like a tablet or a PC Mac, all the way up to something if you're lucky enough to have the Surface Hub or Hub 2. How do you think about design that's meant to scale across devices?
Actually, like when I'm designing, I usually sort of do it intuitively. Mm-hmm. I rarely go think about it as you need to do this or that. I have a list of steps that I need to take, and it's just layout, making sure that it works on different layouts, make sure that information is conveyed in the right way on these layouts. Nothing is lost when you switch layouts, when you go from one column into full page layout, making sure that I'm using the right styles, right components to build the web part. Because if you think about it, building a web part, if you are using Fabric Toolkit, is really easy. It's similar to building bricks and putting them together and then just making sure that it looks good overall on different breakpoints. You don't even need to think about accessibility or stuff like that, because everything is taken care by the toolkit itself. If you're applying different colors, then You can also use like a theme generator and run these colors against theme generator to make sure that accessibility standards are met and the font sizes are right and stuff like that. So it's sort of an easy process to me because I've been doing it for so long that I'm no longer think about it as a something that needs my attention.
And to me, hearing you describe it and knowing some of the feedback that we get from our customers, there's this way that we build it with design principles. It sounds like with the toolkit that keeps us within the range of here's what we know works, and when we change that, it gets changed automatically. But also just from a user perspective, it sounds to me the way you described it is you also just know intuitively what is right for the users based on what you've built, how it's received.
Yes. If you have like enough experience, then you can already see how it's going to work, but running it by research department is also good. We have an amazing team of researchers, and you can always approach them and involve them in testing the web part to make sure it works the right way, to make sure that all the requests are accounted for and all the criteria and standards are met.
The other thing I noticed, when you talk about it going through the review for people to say, yes, it works as expected, or it could be better if we did X or Y, it also spans not only just how is this web part developed, does it function right, but it also then has design as a big part of that review. Does it look great? Is it what I expected to see if I chose X or Y when I configured the web part?
Right.
Just real briefly, what is it like to work with the developers, not as an end, but as something you do at the same time, you design and develop at the same time?
So usually depending on a feature or a web part we are working on, we usually have feature crews. These are teams of people representing different disciplines, software engineers, project managers, researchers that all work together to make sure that we are doing the right thing. Working with software engineers specifically is a breeze here. Like you just send the spec to them of the new aspects of the web part, because as I said previously, like you are using the toolkit, and if there is nothing new, there is not much you can actually need to do because everything is spec'd already and they're building it just using that toolkit. But delivering red lines is easy, and just following back with software engineers, making sure that what they have implemented actually looks like what you have designed.
So let's talk about some of the web parts that are actually going out this month. There are a couple that we've listed, and I'd love to just maybe list a few and get your take on what the design elements of it were that were either simple, fascinating, different, but your take on these web parts. The first one is just a button web part. The button web part is simple as it sounds. Drop a button on the page so that somebody can click and do something. As simple as that might be, I bet there's a little bit more complexity in how you design a button web part.
Button was one of the long requested web parts. It was on our to-do list for a long time, and finally it's been implemented. And as easy as it sounds, like just the button, there were some challenges to make sure that it works right. For instance, you need to make sure that this button uses the colors that are going to be accessible on different backgrounds. If you use like soft section emphasis or strong section emphasis, the button needs to stand out still. Making sure that you account for different label length, because someone can put just a word, but in a different language it can be 2 words or 3 words. So making sure that it overflows gracefully if you use it in a narrow one-column layout was one of the challenges to think about.
So is there a small button, a medium button, and a super, super, really, really, really long button?
Yeah, one can make like the button as long as they want. And it's our job as designers to think what's the best way for the button to behave when it's put in constrained environment. And that's something that we took care about.
So next to the button that's going out is one that's kind of similar, but I think serves a very different purpose as far as how people will probably use it. It's the call to action or a banner that you put on it. So it's not a button to click, but it's something to call to attention. And the reason why I think this one is unique and helpful is it still has to follow the design principles that you outline, because you want it to both stand out if it's a call to attention, but at the same time not break design principles. How did you go about thinking about the call to action banner?
So with this one, we actually decided to take an image web part as a background, as a base for the call to action web part. And we defined what are the requirement elements of the web part, which are the image itself, the label, and the button, and how people perceive creating this or customizing this call to action web part. What would be the right user flow for people to customize the web part? And we decided that it's going to be, if you think like of 1990s, when people used to have just these banners and they were all built in Photoshop, and there were not a lot of flexibility of how these web parts, how these banners respond to different breakpoints. So we needed to account for different breakpoints when designing our call to action web part, to make sure that the text is fully shown, nothing is hidden, nothing is lost in the process of changing the viewport.
One of the first things that I check if I either have an important news article that I publish internally, or just from a demo perspective, it's just fun to highlight, is showing a page in its sort of full fidelity in a web browser, and then showing somebody on the phone through the SharePoint mobile app. This page natively renders beautifully, and it often is really unique, and it almost looks different even though it conveys the same exact information, because you've designed it so nicely in the way that you would expect people to consume information on a much smaller device without me having to do anything.
Yeah, that was, again, one of the challenges with the call to action web part, just to test it against different breakpoints, make sure that we render it properly and it looks visually stunning regardless of the environment or the media you're seeing this banner on.
Mm-hmm. So the last one, just to round it off, because it's a little bit different than the first two, is the world clock. And I can imagine not only all the clock designs that you probably all went through, but how did you most want to convey these different time zones when people put them on the page to emphasize what they're getting across, that, here is a piece of information that, is highlighted across a number of different teams working across the world. How did you all go about thinking about that web part and putting it into production?
Well, this one is an interesting one, because if you think about time, it seems to be so obvious and easy to just render like 4 digits and that's it. But then there is like cultural differences coming into play. Let's say in Europe, people just use 24-hour format where they don't use PM, AM, and you need to account for that, as well as with weather web part that comes together with world clock. You need to account for Celsius and Fahrenheit. And accounting for all these cultural differences was an interesting challenge, because you need to place the AM, PM label, and I added like a sort of like an interesting twist to it by placing AM at the top when it's daytime, PM at the bottom. And we also did a lot of research whether we should make the web part be black when it's nighttime. But then with all the theming capabilities of SharePoint, that was a little bit challenging, and we decided not to go this route, just to avoid all these different backgrounds clashing and to maintain accessibility.
Something tells me user voice, the most popular request that's going to come after this podcast, is dark mode for the world clock web part.
Could be.
Okay, so last question. I think it's a great one for both me and our listeners to hear you answer. Of the new web parts, old web parts, classic, modern, the whole spectrum, what is your favorite web part?
Well, it's really challenging to just designate a single one that's my favorite. I I can try and highlight just a handful of those that I really like, text web part, and it's amazing how much you can achieve just by using typography, font sizes, font styling, font color on the page in terms of design. Hero is a nice one. It's visually rich. It can use different layouts. Highlighted content is a good one because it allows you to configure it like in an incredible...
I was going to say, that is one of our most complex yet most dynamic web parts that we offer.
Right. And the last one probably is a countdown timer, which I like because it uses image background and it stands out so much that it's really hard to miss.
Well, we'll use this as a countdown to the end of this portion. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all the design work and really the mindful thought that you put into making great experiences, across what could be a very busy page to make it consumable. So, Max, thanks for your time.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Now that you have in your mind all these wonderful ways that you're going to go and try out all these new web parts and create amazing news articles and SharePoint pages, let's turn to teamwork. What now can you do either better, differently, or new when you work across and collaborate with however you describe your team and your team members? The first thing that I want to describe, that it's relatively new in terms of it being now generally available, but something that we talked about before. But we want to reiterate that it's now not only in its finished stages, but it's available to everyone. And that's the ability to both preview CAD files and, of course, use them in the context of them being stored in OneDrive or SharePoint. So really the big thing that's now being delivered is you get these really rich previews of DWG files when you're navigating where you've stored them, whether that's in OneDrive or SharePoint, or even in Microsoft Teams that leverages the same technology to give you this great visual cue of what this file is. We partnered with Autodesk to use the AutoCAD technology to be able to display these rich previews inline. And, of course, it shows you all that extended detail as you focus in and zoom on the different facets of the CAD drawing. And this is consistent across the web and, of course, when you move into the native AutoCAD application. The big value is that the file stays stored where you started it. It doesn't open it, download it into the wrong location, and you get a great visual cue of what is actually in the file. So great work between the two companies, Autodesk and Microsoft, to really enable you to have this rich experience when working with DWG files. In that same context with files, it's really important to know what is happening with a file, whether it's a CAD file, an Office document, a PDF. So we've innovated in one area that we've really been iterating on for quite some time now, and it's a new feature for when you hover over a title of a file and you get that rich file card. We're now including what we call activity highlights. This feature shows relevant file activities, like if someone that you work with edits, comments, or mentions you, that activity will A, be displayed and associated with that file, and if it's actionable, there will be a link that will take you right to whatever it is that somebody had done to that file. If it's an @mention on a comment on a particular paragraph, that link will take you directly to that paragraph, but of course it will show you that context of what the person was asking you to do or clarify or just had a question about. So that on-hover activity will show you everything that's happening in the file and that it's actionable. Really, we'll see those activities and be able to do something with it. So to round out teamwork, I want to hone in on an area of teamwork that's pretty important. These are 3 sharing features that landed this month, and they all kind of work off of each other, certainly play within that same space of being able to share most dynamically and, of course, being able to report on it. So the first sharing element that's being released this month or has been released is that site owners can now manage sharing and access requests from a settings site panel really in a more modern way. So if you own a site and you go to work with the site settings panel, you'll now be able to change the sharing settings. This is something where you don't need to go into the advanced permissions anymore. So for example, a site owner can use the new panel to allow only owners to share files, folders, and the site itself, thus restricting everyone else from sharing. These used to be, 2 or 3 clicks in, and now it's a lot more easy to access, and of course it's easy to change when you need to. So a second sharing feature that's really specific in how, when you share, how things can expire based on when you shared a document or a link to a document. And this is now something that you can do on a per-site basis. It used to be that you could set a per-site anonymous link expiration for the entire tenant, and everybody had to play by the same rules. But with different groups and different use cases, you might have the need to be more restrictive or less restrictive on the amount of time that a link to a document will expire. So now different admins for different sites can customize this expiration length and certainly still need to abide by the governance policies that are in place that you can't have something expire more than X or Y, but that they can be more flexible on whether they need something to be a longer or a shorter duration to be as protective as they need to when it comes to expiring links. So now site owners have much more flexibility in controlling the duration of an expiration. The third one is a feature that's actually been asked for a long period of time, and the team's been working hard on not only providing the capabilities, but doing it in a way that gives you a lot of material and information to work with. So we're starting to release for the first time specific sharing reports. So this means that SharePoint site owners can now see all the items in their site that have been shared with any user. A CSV file gets output and shows all the content that's being shared both inside and outside of the organization. So no matter how you've shared that inside or outside the organization, you will see all of that activity. So a big use case is the details around how content has been shared externally. And from this report, you would simply pivot on all the content from the shared with external user to then report on all unique external users and the permissions, the links, the content that they've clicked on, viewed, shared, and used. And like any reporting in Microsoft 365, you can then take this information, build custom scripts to pull out only the information that you're really looking for from a sharing perspective, and you can always bring it into Power BI to further drill into the patterns that you wish to track over time. So we'll definitely put a link in the show notes here so you can learn more about what they are, how to work with them, but you should know that this is a really nice detailed sharing report to give you a great sense of how is content being used, who has it been shared with, and how can I get visibility on that over time. With that, let's move into related technology. I've got three things, two of them that are actually technology-based, and one of them is just a reminder of something that we work really hard on achieving, and it's more news and information that I wanted to share with you. So the first topic in related items is what we're offering from a storage perspective for OneDrive Personal. This is in the consumer space, but as we all have this potential to be a dual user, spanning from work to life, you have needs of storing different kinds of content, photo backup for all the things that you take when you're on family trips, or different files that you keep with you that are specific to your family or to your personal use. In that space, we're increasing the amount of content that you can get, whether you have the basic offering, which you get 5 gigs for free, or in the paid space where you can get up to 100 gigabytes. And then it starts to get really interesting, which is really the most requested feature that we had in that space. When you're an Office 365 subscriber, that's either personal or home, you can now get additional storage in increments of 200 gigabytes, which really starts with a default of 1 terabyte. So even if you don't buy additional storage, you get a terabyte with an Office 365 subscription. And then you can have up to 2 terabytes in those 200 gigabit increments. So we've been hammered over the years of not having any way to go above that default of 1 terabyte. But across the board, all the options, either the defaults or the ability to get more, have gone up. Got a great link to share with you so you can go read about either what you have or what you might want to step up to so you can learn more from a storage perspective. So the second related item is not a feature announcement or a release at all. It just will help you get the context of how Yammer can be put into SharePoint for real distinct scenarios. And I really want to highlight a guest blog from one of our intranet experts out there in the world, Sam Marshall. He really walks through the 3 different offerings of Yammer: the Yammer Conversations web part, the Yammer Highlights web part, and the Yammer Classic web part. What they are, but really where the article gets interesting is the different use cases in how you can enable not just Yammer in SharePoint, but so that you can enable a better outreach for a CEO in a company to do better support, leveraging those kind of question and answer scenarios in line with the other context beyond just the use of the Yammer web part that might be right alongside quick links and news. So it's just an article we wanted to point to. It's related technology with Yammer, and Sam does a really nice job giving clarity around how to use these different Yammer components, but really the value of why. The third element is all around how Microsoft has been selected as a leader in 2 Forrester waves. And like I told you, the last one really isn't directly product related, but we really wanted to highlight that recently Microsoft was listed as a leader in 2 Forrester Wave reports. Microsoft was recognized as a leader in both ECM, which is the enterprise content management space, and the CCP, which is the content collaboration platform, which used to be listed as the file sync and share. The analyst report showcases strong support for both SharePoint and OneDrive in how it supports ECM and CCP, combined with Power Apps and Microsoft Flow. And in Forrester's words, Microsoft leads the pack with a global scale and support of the full content lifecycle, and that Microsoft 365 is, quote, the best fit for customers that want a single source of cloud content services. And we round that out with the notion from Forrester that Microsoft should be shortlisted by companies that rely on Office for content authoring and communication that need a solid set of repository, collaboration, and content automation capabilities. I want to highlight this. This is the one selfish moment of the podcast because Chris and I both contribute into highlighting all the great work that our engineers are doing. And then certainly see that in the context of what other third parties are offering in the competitive space and sometimes partnering to get a lot of this done. There's a great set of reports that Forrester puts out, and there's a lot of great information if you wanted to learn how to leverage this side of SharePoint, OneDrive, Power Apps, and Flow in the context of either ECM or the CCP space. It's a great report, and we put a lot of effort into it, and we're really pleased with the results. Next, teasers. Are you ready for that weird whisper from Mark about what's coming next month? Well, this is exciting because I think we've got 2 great teasers this month coming in October 2019. The first one is the one at the SharePoint conference that got almost the most claps in Jeff Teeper's keynote, and that is site rename. And we're already planning to talk with the main feature owner about site rename feature capability. But I think you'll be really pleased when you start using this for the needs of changing the actual SharePoint site URL. Very exciting. The second teaser is Planner is actually coming for both the frontline workers or the F1 SKU and to GCC High. And this is important for us when you start to think about task management in the context of either Microsoft Teams or SharePoint with our Planner web part or the ability to connect Planner into Microsoft Teams. It's very important those capabilities, SharePoint and Teams, are available in those spaces. And with Planner coming into F1 and GCC High, it'll enable a lot of those rich scenarios for a big set of customers that have been waiting for this. So teaser number 2 is Planner for F1 and GCC High. So it's time to put away the GPS, set down the map. Let's cover the resources that are available to you always. We'll have a list of important resource links in the show notes based on this month's innovation, and these links will assist you in learning more about the Message Center, Microsoft 365 Public Roadmap, our SharePoint and OneDrive community blogs, and of course, all things Twitter, all the places that you need to get up to speed and stay ahead. Please use those resources, and especially if there's something that's missing or something that could be better, please let us know. We hope you've enjoyed this nice, smooth ride through the pit stop. We thank you for coming along for the ride. Thanks for listening to the Intrazone Roadmap Pitstop September 2019 edition. Stay engaged, ask questions, push us to get the best information and insights that you need. We're here to put both our and your best change management foot forward. Stay safe out there on the roadmap. Till next month, thank you for tuning in.